The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of New Haven Colony as Emma Carter pressed her small face against the window of her family's habitat. Above her, two massive alien warships hung in the pale blue sky like dark clouds that never moved. She had been watching them for 3 months now, ever since they first appeared and made everyone in the colony scared and worried. Emma's mother, Dr. Helen Carter, walked into the room carrying a cup of synthetic coffee. The real coffee had run out weeks ago, along with most of the good food from Earth. Helen looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that seemed to grow bigger every day. She placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Still watching the ships?" "Sweetie?" Helen asked, her voice trying to sound cheerful but failing. Emma nodded without turning away from the window. "Mama, why don't they just go away? Don't they have their own homes?" Helen sighed. It was a question Emma asked almost every day, and Helen never knew how to answer it in a way that wouldn't frighten her 8-year-old daughter. How could she? Explain that two powerful alien armies wanted their planet and saw the human colonists as nothing more than obstacles to remove. "They're having a disagreement about our planet," Helen said carefully. "But don't worry. The grown-ups are working very hard to solve it." Emma finally turned from the window, her bright green eyes filled with the kind of hope that only children possess. "Maybe we could invite them for dinner. Grandma always said that sharing food makes people friends." Helen's heart ached at her daughter's innocent suggestion. If only peace could be achieved so simply. She knelt down to Emma's level and smoothed her brown hair. "That's a very kind thought, Emma, but these visitors are different from the people Grandma used to know." Outside, the colony buzzed with quiet activity. 847 human settlers went about their daily routines, but everyone moved with the careful tension of people living under constant threat. The farmers tended their hydroponic gardens with one eye on the sky. The engineers maintained the energy barriers that protected the settlement while checking and rechecking their power levels. The security teams led by Captain Lisa Bennett conducted regular patrols, their weapons always ready but feeling useless against the massive ships above. Colony Administrator Jake Morrison stood in the Central Command Center, studying the latest reports from his scouts. The numbers never changed much anymore. The Xanthari Empire had positioned 4,000 soldiers around the northern perimeter of the colony, their scaled reptilian forms easily visible through binoculars. Their technology was advanced, their discipline perfect, and their intentions clear. They wanted the rare minerals buried beneath New Haven's soil, and they saw humans as an inferior species that should step aside or be removed. To the south, the Vextai clans had established their own encampment with roughly 3,000 warriors. These aliens looked different from the Xanthari, with skin that seemed to shift colors like living plants and tall, slender bodies that moved with fluid grace. They claimed to be seeking a new home after their original world was destroyed, but their weapons were just as deadly as their enemies. The two alien armies had been at war for over a century, fighting across multiple star systems in an endless cycle of violence and revenge. New Haven Colony had the terrible luck of being established on a planet that both sides wanted. For 3 months, the humans had been trapped between these warring factions, watching and waiting while their supplies dwindled and their hope faded. Paul Carter, Emma's father, worked in the engineering section, trying to stretch their power reserves for another few days. The colony's fusion reactor was running at minimum output to conserve fuel, which meant limited heating, lighting, and water recycling. He wiped sweat from his forehead as he adjusted another power coupling, wondering how much longer they could maintain even basic life support. "Any word from the supply ships?" Paul asked Lieutenant Gary Wells, who was monitoring the communication array. Gary shook his head grimly. "Nothing gets through. Both alien fleets are shooting down anything that tries to reach us. We're completely cut off." Paul closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of his wife and daughter. Helen was rationing medical supplies while treating colonists for stress-related illnesses and malnutrition. Emma was too young to understand their situation fully, but she had stopped asking for her favorite foods and never complained when her portions got smaller. The colonists had come to Kepler 442 be seeking a better life. The planet was beautiful. with rich soil, clean water, and perfect weather for farming. They had built New Haven from nothing, creating a small but thriving community where families could raise their children safely. Now that dream was turning into a nightmare. In the Xanthari camp, Commander Vexstock studied tactical displays showing the human settlement. His yellow eyes, set in a face covered with dark green scales, showed no emotion as he planned the eventual assault. The humans had surprised him by lasting this long, but their resistance was meaningless. Once he eliminated the Vextai threat, he would give the colonists one final chance to leave peacefully. If they refused, his soldiers would remove them. By force, Vexstock had fought in dozens of battles across the galaxy. He had seen species rise and fall, worlds conquered and destroyed. Humans were young and weak compared to the great powers of the galaxy. They had no right to claim valuable territory when superior species needed it more. The commander felt no hatred toward them, only the cold calculation of a military leader who understood that sentiment was a luxury he could not afford. Several kilometers away, Chieftain Kalra of the Vextai walked through her camp, her skin shifting from deep purple to worried blue as she considered their situation. Her people had been wandering the galaxy for 50 years, searching for a new home after their beautiful forest world was consumed by a dying star. This planet could provide everything they needed to rebuild their civilization, but first they would have to defeat the Xanthari and deal with the human colonists. Unlike Commander Vexstock, Kalra felt some sympathy for the humans. They seemed peaceful enough, and their children played in the settlement's gardens much like young Vextai would play in the living forests of their lost homeworld. But sympathy was another luxury she could not afford. Her people needed this planet to survive, and she would not let sentiment prevent her from giving them the future they deserved. As the day wore on, tension in the colony continued to build. Parents held their children a little tighter. Adults spoke in hushed voices about rationing and escape plans. The energy barriers hummed with power, but everyone knew they would not hold against a determined assault from either alien army. Emma Carter spent the afternoon in her room, drawing pictures with her few remaining crayons. She drew the alien ships, but in her drawings they were bright colors instead of dark metal. She added windows and doors, imagining the aliens inside as people who might be lonely or scared, just like the colonists. In one picture, she drew herself waving at the ships, with all the aliens waving back. As evening approached, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Weather sensors indicated a major electrical storm was moving toward the colony, the kind that would ground all aircraft and disrupt communications. Paul Carter watched the approaching storm with mixed feelings. The bad weather would provide temporary protection from air attacks, but it would also cut them off from any outside help. The first drops of rain began to fall as emergency sirens wailed across the colony. But these sirens were different from the usual storm warnings. Captain Bennett's voice crackled over the communication system with urgent news that would change everything. All colonists to emergency stations. We have multiple aircraft down near the perimeter. Repeat, multiple aircraft down. Medical teams to the north gate immediately. The war had finally come to New Haven Colony, but not in the way anyone expected. The rain poured down in heavy sheets as Captain Lisa Bennett led her security team through the storm toward the crash site. Lightning flashed across the dark sky and thunder rolled over the colony like the sound of distant explosions. The wind howled through the settlement's buildings, making everyone nervous and jumpy. Dr. Helen Carter grabbed her medical kit and ran toward the north gate, her boots splashing through puddles that had formed in the unpaved streets. Behind her, 2 medical assistants carried emergency supplies and a portable scanner. They had practiced this drill many times, but always hoped they would never need to use it for real. What do we know about the crash? Helen shouted over the storm as she reached Captain Bennett's position. 3 aircraft went down about half a kilometer from the perimeter, Bennett replied, checking her weapon one more time. Looks like 2 Xanthari fighters and 1 Vextai scout ship. They were shooting at each other when the lightning hit. Helen felt her stomach tighten. Treating wounded aliens was going to be difficult enough without having to deal with enemies. who wanted to kill each other. But her medical training was clear about such situations. She was a doctor first, and doctors helped anyone who needed healing. The security team moved carefully through the rain, their energy weapons ready but not powered up. They found the wreckage scattered across a muddy field where the colonists usually grew wheat. The two Zentauri fighters had crashed close together, their metal hulls twisted and smoking. The Vextai scout ship had come down about 50 meters away, its organic-looking hull cracked but still glowing with a faint blue light. "Movement in the Zentauri wreckage," reported Sergeant Dave Collins, pointing his scanner at the nearest crash site. "2 life signs, both injured but stable." Bennett nodded and turned to check the Vextai ship. "1 survivor here, too. Looks like she's hurt pretty bad." Helen took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Bring them all to the medical bay. We'll sort out the politics later." It took an hour to extract the 3 aliens from their crashed ships and transport them to the colonies. Medical facility. The Zentauri were both females, though Helen had to use her scanner to determine that since their reptilian features made it hard to tell. The larger one had dark green scales and several deep cuts along her arms. The smaller one was younger, with brighter green scales and what looked like a broken leg. The Vextai was definitely female, with skin that shifted between different shades of purple and blue. She had been badly burned when her ship's power core overloaded, and her left arm hung at a strange angle. What struck Helen most was how the alien's skin color seemed to reflect her emotions. When she was in pain, it turned dark red. When she was scared, it became pale yellow. "Set up 3 separate treatment areas," Helen ordered her assistants. "And make sure they can't see each other directly. The last thing we need is a fight in the medical bay." The wounded aliens were conscious, but weak. The larger Zentauri, who Helen learned was called Sergeant Zexra, watched everything with suspicious yellow eyes. She tried to refuse treatment at first, growling something in her own language that sounded like insults. The younger Zentauri, Private Tuckle, seemed more cooperative but kept looking around nervously. The Vextai scout Yolanara was the most seriously injured. Her burns were deep, and her broken arm would need surgery. But she was also the most curious about the humans, asking questions in broken English about their medical procedures and why they were helping her. "Why do you heal enemies?" Yolanara asked, her skin shifting to a confused orange color. Helen paused in her treatment to look at the alien. "Because you're hurt, and I'm a doctor. That's what doctors do." The concept seemed to puzzle all 3. Aliens, in their experience, enemies were killed or left to die. The idea of helping someone who might later become a threat was foreign to them. While Helen worked on the wounded aliens, word spread through the colony about their unexpected guests. Some colonists were angry, demanding that the aliens be turned away or handed over to their respective armies. Others were curious about the chance to meet beings from other worlds. Most were simply scared and wanted the aliens gone as quickly as possible. Colony Administrator Jake Morrison arrived at the medical bay to assess the situation. He found Helen working on Yolanara's burns while her assistants treated the 2 Zentauri. The aliens were quiet now, but the tension in the room was obvious. "How long before they can be moved?" Morrison asked in a low voice. "At least 24 hours, Helen replied without looking up from her patient. "Maybe longer for the Vextai. Her injuries are severe." Morrison nodded grimly. Having 3 alien soldiers in the colony was dangerous, but sending them back to their armies in the middle of a storm would be impossible. They would have to keep them until the weather cleared. "Post guards at all entrances," Morrison told Captain Bennett. "And make sure both alien armies know we're treating their people." "Maybe that will buy us some time?" Emma Carter had been playing in her room when the storm began, building towers with her blocks and talking to her stuffed rabbit. The sound of the sirens had frightened her, but her father had explained that it was just an emergency drill. Children were not supposed to know about the crashed ships or the alien soldiers in the medical bay. But Emma was a curious child, and she had heard her parents talking in worried voices about visitors and hurt people. After dinner, while her parents were busy with colony business, she decided to find out what was happening. She slipped out of their habitat and made her way through the quiet corridors toward the medical bay. The medical facility was in the center of the colony, a building that usually treated minor injuries and illnesses. Emma had been there many times when she had scraped her knees or needed her yearly checkup. She knew all the hallways and rooms, including the back entrance that was usually left unlocked. Emma pushed open the door and stepped inside, expecting to find her mother treating some colonist who had been hurt in the storm. Instead, she found herself face to face with three beings unlike anything she had ever seen. Sergeant Zexra was the first to notice the small human child. The Zenthari warrior's yellow eyes widened in surprise as Emma walked into the room without any fear. Zexra had fought in many battles and seen many enemies, but she had never encountered a human child before. The little girl was tiny compared to adult humans, with bright green eyes and brown hair that was still damp from the rain. Private Takal made a hissing sound that might have been surprise or alarm. Her compound eyes, which looked like those of a giant insect, tracked Emma's movement across the room. She had heard that humans had young, but seeing one in person was different from reading intelligence reports. Scout Yelenara's skin shifted to a bright yellow color that indicated extreme curiosity. She had always been interested in other species and their customs, but human children were legendary for their unpredictable behavior. This one seemed completely unafraid of three armed alien soldiers. "Hello," Emma said politely, the way her parents had taught her to greet strangers. "Are you the hurt visitors? Mama said you were in an accident." The three aliens looked at each other, then back at the child. None of them knew how to respond to such a direct and innocent question. In their worlds, children were kept far away from military situations and never spoke to enemy soldiers. Helen Carter chose that moment to return from getting supplies. She stopped in the doorway, her medical kit falling from her hands as she saw her daughter standing calmly in the middle of three alien warriors. "Emma," Helen said very carefully, "please come here slowly." But Emma was already walking towards Scout Yelenara, whose skin had shifted to a beautiful pattern of blue and silver. "Your skin is so pretty," Emma said with genuine admiration. "Does it always change colors like that?" Yelenara's skin flickered through several different hues before settling on a warm gold color. "It shows my feelings," she said in her broken English. "Right now I am surprised." "That's so cool," Emma said, clapping her hands together. "I wish my skin could do that. It would make playing games so much more fun." Helen slowly approached her daughter, ready to grab her and run if any of the aliens made a threatening move. But to her amazement, all three soldiers seemed more curious than hostile. They watched Emma with the same fascination that she showed toward them. "Are you very hurt?" Emma asked Yelenara, noticing the bandages on her arm and the burn cream on her skin. "I will heal," Yelenara replied, her skin shifting to a gentle green color. "Your mother is a good healer," Emma beamed with pride. "Mama helps everyone feel better. She says that's what doctors do." Sergeant Zexra spoke for the first time since Emma had entered the room. "You are not afraid of us, small human?" Emma tilted her head, considering the question seriously. "Should I be? You're hurt, and my mama is making you better. That means you're patients, not scary people." The logic was so simple and pure that it left all three aliens speechless. They had spent their entire lives thinking of other species as enemies or allies, threats or resources. The idea that someone could see them simply as people who needed help was completely foreign to their experience. "What are your names?" Emma asked, settling down on a nearby chair as if she intended to stay for a while. The aliens exchanged glances. Giving their names to an enemy was usually considered a security risk. The dinner table in the Carter family habitat had never hosted such unusual guests. Helen Carter looked nervously at the three alien soldiers sitting around their small dining area, wondering if this was the most dangerous or most hopeful thing she had ever done. Her husband Paul sat quietly, ready to protect his family if needed. While Emma chattered excitedly about having visitors for dinner, the aliens looked uncomfortable in the human furniture. Sergeant Zexra's large reptilian frame barely fit in the chair, and she kept glancing toward the exits. Private Takal's compound eyes moved constantly, scanning for threats even though her weapons had been taken away. Scout Yulanara's skin flickered between nervous yellow and curious blue as she tried to understand human customs. "Before we eat," Emma announced, "everyone has to share something happy from their home. It's a rule in our family." The three aliens looked at each other with confusion. They had been prepared for interrogation or political discussion, not requests for happy memories. In their military training, they had learned to resist torture and give only basic information to enemies. But nobody had taught them how to respond to a child asking about joy. "I do not understand," Zexra said carefully. "You want us to reveal information about our worlds?" Emma giggled. "Not secret stuff. Just something that makes you smile. Like my favorite thing about Earth is how the flowers smell after it rains. What's your favorite thing about your home?" Helen and Paul exchanged glances. Their daughter's innocent question had created a moment unlike anything in recorded history. Three enemy soldiers, representing species that had been at war for over a century, were being asked to share their happiest memories with a human child. Zexra was quiet for a long moment, her yellow eyes studying Emma's expectant face. The Zenthari sergeant had not thought about happiness in many years. Her life was duty, discipline, and war. But something about the child's genuine curiosity made her remember things she had forgotten. "On my homeworld," Zexra began slowly, "there are gardens made of crystal. When the sun sets, the crystals sing. Different colors make different sounds. As a hatchling, I would play among them with my siblings, trying to create melodies by running from crystal to crystal." Emma's eyes grew wide with wonder. "That sounds so beautiful. Can you remember any of the songs?" Zexra's expression softened slightly. There was one. A lullaby my mother would hum when the crystals sang at night. It was about stars finding their way home across the galaxy. "That's so pretty," Emma said, clapping her hands together. "I bet it sounded like magic." Private Takal watched this exchange with growing amazement. She had never seen Sergeant Zexra show such emotion. The older Zenthari was known for her stern discipline and cold efficiency. But now she was talking about childhood memories and music, her voice gentle in a way that Takal had never heard before. "What about you?" Emma asked, turning to Takal. "What makes you happy about your home?" Takal's compound eyes reflected the light as she considered the question. "My people migrate across the galaxy following ancient paths through the stars. When I was young, I would watch millions of our ships moving together in perfect formation. It was like a dance that lasted for months, with every ship knowing exactly where to go without anyone giving orders." "Like birds flying together?" Emma said with understanding. "We have birds on Earth that do that. They make shapes in the sky and never bump into each other. It's like they're all thinking the same thoughts." "Yes," Takal said, her voice showing surprise. "Exactly like that. We call it the Great Harmony. Every Zenthari dreams of being part of it someday." Emma nodded seriously. "That sounds wonderful. I would love to see that." She turned to Yulanara, whose skin had shifted to warm golden colors. "What about you? What's the happiest thing about your world?" Yulanara's skin brightened as she began to speak. "My people lived in forests that were alive. Not just the trees and plants, but the whole forest was one living thing. The trees would talk to each other through their roots, sharing thoughts and feelings. During the season of new growth, every person in my clan would join with the forest mind and feel the joy of life beginning again." "The trees could think?" Emma asked, her eyes shining with fascination. "All of them together had one great mind," Yulanara explained. "They would share memories of rain and sunshine, of small creatures playing in their branches, of seasons changing over hundreds of years. When we joined with them, we could feel all of that joy at once." Emma was quiet for a moment, trying to imagine what it would be like to share thoughts with trees. That must have been like having the biggest family in the world. "Why did you leave?" Yulanara's skin shifted to sad purple. "Our star was dying. The forest mind knew it was coming and helped us prepare to leave. But leaving was the hardest thing we ever did. We have been searching for a new home for 50 years. "I'm sorry you lost your home," Emma said with genuine Sadness. That must make you very sad. The simple sympathy in the child's voice touched something deep in Yulinara's heart. She had not expected compassion from humans, especially not from their young. Her skin shifted to a warm, grateful pink. "Thank you, little one," Yulinara said softly. "It is kind of you to care about our loss." Helen had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. Her 8-year-old daughter was casually achieving what diplomats and politicians had failed to do for centuries. She was getting enemy soldiers to see each other as individuals with hopes, dreams, and losses rather than as threats to be eliminated. "Now we can eat," Emma announced, satisfied that everyone had shared something happy. "But first, we have to be thankful for our food." The aliens watched as the Carter family held hands and bowed their heads. Emma reached out and took Yulinara's uninjured hand, then looked expectantly at the other aliens. After a moment of confusion, they joined the circle. "Thank you for our food," Emma said simply. "And thank you for our new friends who are sharing dinner with us. Even though they're hurt, they're here, and that makes me happy." The dinner itself was simple. Synthesized protein that tasted like chicken, vegetables grown in the colony's hydroponic gardens, and water that had been recycled so many times it barely had any flavor. It was not much, but it represented a significant portion of the Carter family's weekly food allowance. Emma watched as the aliens carefully tasted the human food. Zexra chewed thoughtfully, her reptilian features showing surprise at the flavors. Takole's complex mouth parts worked differently than human mouths, but she seemed to find the meal acceptable. Yulinara ate slowly, her skin shifting to pleased orange as she discovered that human food was compatible with her system. "This is good," Yulinara said, looking surprised. "I expected it to be strange, but it reminds me of foods from my homeworld." "Really?" Emma asked excitedly. "What kind of food do you usually eat?" As the aliens described their traditional foods, Emma listened with fascination. She learned that Xanthari ate mostly meat and crystallized minerals, while Vextai preferred fruits and vegetables that had been grown in living soil. Both species had foods that were similar to things humans ate, just prepared differently. "We're not so different after all," Emma observed with the simple wisdom that children often possess. "We all need food to grow strong, we all have families. We love, and we all have homes we miss when we're away." The three aliens looked at each other, then at the small human child who had just summarized something their leaders had failed to understand in over a century of warfare. They did share common ground, basic needs and desires that transcended species boundaries. "You are very wise for such a young being," Zexra said, her voice showing respect that she had never felt for a human before. "Grandma used to say that." "The most important things are usually the simplest things," Emma replied. "Like being kind to people who are hurt, sharing food when you have it, and remembering that everyone has feelings." As the meal continued, the conversation became more relaxed. The aliens began asking questions about human customs, while Emma wanted to know everything about their different worlds. Paul and Helen watched in amazement as their daughter effortlessly bridged gaps between species that had seemed impossible to cross. "On my world," Takal said during a discussion about families, "I have a daughter about your age. She loves to watch the stars and dreams of joining the great harmony when she grows up." "What's her name?" Emma asked. "Kixra," Takal replied, her voice soft with affection. "She has bright green scales like mine, and she asks questions about everything, just like you do." Emma's face lit up with joy. "I would love to meet her someday. We could be friends and play together." The idea of their children being friends was so foreign to the aliens that they fell silent. In their world, the children of enemies were future enemies, but looking at Emma's innocent face, they began to imagine a different possibility. "What if children from all our worlds could play together?" Emma asked, her young mind already leaping ahead to possibilities that adults would never consider. "We could share our games and stories and learn about each other's homes." Yulinara's skin shifted to thoughtful silver. That would be beautiful, little one. But our peoples have been at war for so long that we have forgotten how to be friends." "Maybe. They just need to have dinner together," Emma suggested. like we're doing now. The storm clouds began to break apart as dawn approached over New Haven Colony. Sergeant Zexra stood at the window of the medical bay, watching the first rays of sunlight pierce through the gray sky. Soon the weather would clear enough for aircraft to fly again, and she would have to return to her unit. But everything had changed during the long night, and she was not the same soldier who had crashed just hours before. Behind her, Private Takal was helping Scout Yelinara adjust the bandages on her injured arm. The sight would have been impossible to imagine yesterday. A Zenthari soldier caring for a wounded Vextai warrior was something that had never happened in over a century of warfare. Yet here they were, former enemies working together as if they had been allies all their lives. Emma Carter had fallen asleep in a chair beside Yelinara's bed, her small hand still holding the alien's uninjured one. The child had refused to leave until she was sure all three visitors were comfortable and not in pain. Her stuffed rabbit sat in her lap, and she had covered both herself and Yelinara with a small blanket decorated with pictures of earth animals. "She is remarkable," Yelinara whispered, her skin showing soft, warm colors as she looked down at the sleeping child. "I have never met anyone like her." "Nor I," Zexra agreed quietly. "In all my years of military service, I have never encountered such pure kindness." She offered her own medicine to an enemy without hesitation. Takal nodded, her compound eyes reflecting the morning light. "My daughter Kixra would like her." "Very much. They both see the universe as a place of wonder rather than danger." The three aliens had spent much of the night talking quietly while Emma dozed. They had shared stories about their families, their hopes for the future, and their fears about the endless war that had consumed their peoples. For the first time, they had seen each other not as enemies to be destroyed, but as individuals with the same basic desires for peace and safety. Dr. Helen Carter entered the medical bay carrying cups of synthetic coffee for everyone. She had barely slept, worried about having three alien soldiers in the colony and amazed by her daughter's effect on them. The change in their behavior was obvious to anyone who looked. They moved differently now, spoke more softly, and showed concern for each other's welfare. "The communications array is working again," Helen announced. "Captain Bennett says both your fleets are asking about your status." The three aliens exchanged glances. They knew that returning to their units would mean resuming their roles as enemy soldiers. The brief peace they had found in the human colony could not last once they were back with their respective armies. "We must go soon," Zexra said reluctantly. "But first there is something we must do." She moved to the communication terminal in the corner of the medical bay and began composing a message to her commanding officer. Her clawed fingers moved carefully over the human keyboard as she tried to find the right words to describe what had happened. "What are you writing?" Takal asked. "The truth," Zexra replied. "Commander Vextok must know about the humans and what we have learned here." Takal and Yelinara watched as Zexra typed her report. The message was unlike any military communication that had ever been sent between their species. Instead of tactical information and casualty reports, it contained descriptions of kindness, generosity, and the possibility of peace. Zexra wrote about Emma's innocent questions that had made them remember joy instead of duty. She described how the child had shared her family's limited food without asking for anything in return. She explained how Emma had offered her own medicine to help an enemy, and how she had treated all three aliens as friends rather than threats. "Commander," Zexra typed, "the humans are not what we believe them to be. They possess a capacity for compassion that exceeds our understanding. Their young show kindness to enemies without fear or hatred. I believe we must reconsider our position regarding this species." When she finished, Zexra showed the message to the other two aliens. They read it carefully, knowing that such a report could be considered treasonous by their respective military commanders. "I will send a similar message to Chieftain Kalra," Yelinara said, her skin shifting to determined blue. "My people need to know what we have discovered here." Takal nodded agreement. "And I will add my own observations to Sergeant Zexra S. Report. Commander Vextok values my tactical assessments. Perhaps he will listen if the message comes from both of us. Yelenara's message to her chieftain was equally unprecedented. She wrote about the living warmth she had felt in the human habitat, so different from the cold efficiency of military barracks. She described how Emma's parents had risked their own safety to heal wounded enemies, asking nothing in return except that their daughter be allowed to share dinner with strangers. "Honored chieftain," Yelenara typed, "these humans have shown us what we lost when our homeworld died. They understand the value of family, community, and caring for others. If we must fight for this planet, perhaps we should fight alongside them rather than against them." Takal added her own observations to Zexra's report, describing how Emma had made connections between their different species that military intelligence had never identified. The child had seen similarities where their leaders saw only differences. Hope where their commanders saw only obstacles. As the three aliens prepared their messages, Emma began to wake up. She stretched and yawned, then looked around the medical bay with sleepy eyes. "Are you feeling better?" she asked Yelenara, whose skin immediately brightened to happy yellow. "Much better, little star," Yelenara replied. "Your kindness has healed more than just my injuries." Emma smiled and climbed down from her chair. She walked to each alien and gave them a gentle hug, careful not to hurt their wounds. "I'm glad you're all friends now." "Friends are much better than fighting." "Yes," Zexra agreed, her voice unusually soft. "Friends are better." Captain Bennett arrived to escort the aliens back to the neutral zone where they could be retrieved by their respective forces. The three soldiers gathered their few belongings and prepared to leave the sanctuary of the human colony. "Will I see you again?" Emma asked as they reached the door. "I hope so, little one," Yelenara said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "Perhaps someday our peoples will be friends like we are now." "I'll draw pictures of your homeworlds," Emma promised. "The crystal gardens and the star dance and the thinking trees? Maybe I can show them to other people so they'll understand how beautiful your homes are." The three aliens felt tears in their eyes, an emotion they had not experienced in years of military service. This small human child had given them something precious, the memory of what it felt like to hope for peace. Instead of preparing for war. As they walked through the colony toward the perimeter, colonists stopped to watch the unusual procession. The sight of three enemy soldiers walking peacefully together was something that would be talked about for years to come. At the neutral zone, the aliens waited for their pickup ships to arrive. They stood close together, reluctant to separate, and return to their former roles as enemies. "Whatever happens," Zexra said quietly, "we must remember what we learned here." "The child showed us a different way," Takal agreed. "Perhaps our leaders will have the wisdom to see it too." "If they do not," Yelenara said, her skin showing determined silver, "then we must find others who will." "Change must begin somewhere, and it might as well begin with us." The pickup ships arrived within minutes of each other. The Xanthari transport was sleek and angular, all sharp edges and efficient design. The Vextai vessel was more organic, its hull seeming to pulse with life. Both ships landed carefully in the neutral zone, their crews alert for any sign of treachery. Before boarding their respective transports, the three aliens did something that shocked their recovery teams. They embraced each other, a gesture of friendship that had never been seen between their species. "Remember the crystal songs?" Yelenara said to Zexra. "Remember the star dance?" Zexra replied to Takal. "Remember the thinking trees?" Takal said to Yelenara. "Remember the little star who brought us together?" they said in unison. The recovery teams were confused by this display, but they followed their orders to retrieve the wounded soldiers without asking questions. As the ships lifted off and headed toward their respective fleets, the three aliens settled in for the journey back to their commands. During the flight, each alien transmitted their prepared messages to their commanding officers. The communications traveled through space at the speed of light, carrying words that had never been spoken between their species, words about hope, understanding, and the possibility of peace. Commander Vexstock received Zexra and Takal's joint report while reviewing tactical plans for the assault on New Haven Colony. He read the message 3 times, his yellow eyes showing confusion and then growing interest. The description of human behavior was unlike anything in his military intelligence files. Compassion toward enemies, he muttered to himself. Sharing resources with those who could destroy them. Teaching their young to show kindness rather than strength. The report challenged everything Vextok believed about military strategy and species dominance. If the humans truly possessed such unusual characteristics, it might explain their unexpected resilience and the loyalty they inspired in other species. The morning sun rose over New Haven colony to reveal something that no one had ever expected to see. Both massive alien fleets hung motionless in the sky, their weapons powered down for the first time in 3 months. On the ground, thousands of Zenthari and Vextai soldiers stood in perfect formation, but they were not preparing for battle. They were waiting. Emma Carter pressed her nose against her bedroom window, watching the strange scene outside. The alien armies that had terrified the colonists for so long were completely still, like toy soldiers arranged on a giant game board. She could see the neutral zone where a large tent had been set up during the night. "Mama?" Emma called to her mother, who was making breakfast in the kitchen. "Why are all the soldiers standing so quietly? Are they playing a game?" Dr. Helen Carter joined her daughter at the window, hardly believing what she was seeing. "Something very important is happening today, sweetie. The leaders of both armies are going to talk to each other." "About what?" Emma asked, her green eyes bright with curiosity. Helen smiled and touched her daughter's cheek. "About peace, Emma. They're going to talk about making peace." In the command tent at the neutral zone, 2 beings who had been enemies for over a century sat across from each other at a simple metal table. Commander Vextok of the Zenthari Empire was a massive reptilian figure, his dark green scales baring the scars of countless battles. His yellow eyes studied his counterpart with careful intelligence. Chieftain Kalra of the Vextai clans was tall and elegant, her plant-like skin shifting through subtle shades of blue and purple as she considered her words. She had led her people through 50 years of searching for a new home, and the possibility of finally finding peace made her both hopeful and cautious. "This is unprecedented," Commander Vextok said in his deep, gravelly voice. "In all my years of military service, I have never sat at a table with a Vextai leader." "Nor I with a Zenthari commander," Kalra replied, her skin showing nervous silver streaks. "But the reports from our soldiers were unusual. They spoke of things I have never heard described before." Both leaders had read the messages from their wounded warriors multiple times. The descriptions of human behavior had challenged everything they thought they knew about this young species. A child who shared food with enemies, parents who healed wounded soldiers without asking for anything in return, a family that welcomed strangers to their dinner table during a siege. "Tell me about this human child," Vextok said. "Your scout spoke of her with great respect." Kalra's skin brightened slightly. "According to Yulinara, the little one showed no fear of any of us. She asked about our homeworlds and listened to our stories as if we were old friends. When Yulinara could not digest the human food properly, the child offered her own medicine. Without hesitation. My soldiers reported similar behavior," Vextok said thoughtfully. "The child treated them as guests rather than enemies. She made them remember joy instead of duty. Sergeant Zexra has served under my command for 15 years, and I have never heard her speak of crystal songs and childhood memories." The 2 commanders sat in silence for a moment, each trying to understand the implications of what their soldiers had experienced. In their military cultures, showing kindness to enemies was seen as weakness. But the human child had turned that concept completely upside down. "What if we have been wrong about strength?" Kalra asked quietly. "What if true power comes from building bridges instead of burning them?" "The thought had occurred to me as well," Vextok admitted. "These humans have survived our siege for 3 months with limited resources and no military support. Their strength does not come from weapons or technology. It comes from their unity," Kalra said, her skin showing thoughtful gold. from their willingness to help each other and even help their enemies when they are in need. As the two leaders talked, their conversation was being monitored by communication officers from both fleets. The soldiers listening to the peaceful discussion could hardly believe what they were hearing. For the first time in living memory, their commanders were talking about cooperation instead of conquest. In New Haven Colony, the settlers went about their daily activities with growing amazement. The alien armies that had threatened them for months remained perfectly still. No weapons were being charged, no attack formations were being prepared. The massive warships in the sky seemed to be waiting for something. Colony Administrator Jake Morrison called an emergency meeting in the community center. Nearly all 800 colonists gathered to discuss the unprecedented situation. "We don't know exactly what's happening," Morrison announced, "but both alien commanders are meeting in the neutral zone and their armies have ceased all hostile activities. This could be our chance for a peaceful resolution." The colonists buzzed with nervous excitement. Some were skeptical, worried that this might be a trick or a temporary pause before a devastating attack. Others dared to hope that the nightmare of the siege might finally be coming to an end. Captain Lisa Bennett stood up to address the crowd. "Whatever happens, we need to be prepared for any outcome. But I want everyone to know that 3 enemy soldiers spent last night in our medical bay, and by morning they were treating each other like old friends. If that's possible, then maybe anything is possible." Back in the command tent, Commander Vexstock and Chieftain Kalra had moved beyond discussing the human child to talking about their own people's needs and desires. "My warriors are tired of war," Vexstock admitted, something he had never said aloud before. "They fight because it is their duty, but many of them have families they have not seen in years. The endless conflict has cost us more than we have gained." "My people are weary from 50 years of wandering," Kalra replied. "We need a place to rebuild our civilization, to heal from the loss of our homeworld. But we do not wish to take it through violence if there is another way." "The planet is large enough for all of us," Vexstock said slowly. "The humans occupy only a small portion of its surface. There are resources enough for 3 species if we work together instead of fighting each other." Kalra's skin shifted to surprised yellow. "You are suggesting ... cooperation?" "I am suggesting that we consider possibilities beyond warfare," Vexstock said carefully. "The human child saw similarities between our species that our military intelligence never identified. Perhaps there is wisdom in her innocent perspective." As the morning progressed, word spread through both alien armies that their leaders were not planning an attack. Instead, they were discussing something that most soldiers had never imagined possible: peace between species that had been enemies for over a century. In the Zenthari camp, Sergeant Zexra stood with her unit watching the command tent in the distance. Her fellow soldiers asked her questions about the humans and what had happened during her time in the colony. "The little one changed everything," Zexra told them. "She made us remember that we are more than just soldiers. We are people with families and dreams, just like the humans, just like the Vextai." In the Vextai camp, Scout Yelanara shared similar stories with her clanmates. Her skin glowed with warm colors as she described Emma's kindness and the dinner that had brought 3 enemies together as friends. "The child sees the universe as it could be," Yelanara explained. "A place where different species help each other instead of fighting. Where children from all worlds can play together and learn from each other." Private Takal, now back with her Zenthari unit, spoke of her daughter Kixra and how much she would like to meet the human child Emma. "Perhaps our children will grow up in a galaxy where peace is possible," she said hopefully. Around midday, Emma Carter appeared at the edge of the neutral zone, carrying a small basket that her mother had helped her prepare. Colony Administrator Morrison and Captain Bennett accompanied her, along with her parents, who were both nervous and proud of their daughter's initiative. "I brought lunch for the commanders," Emma announced to the guards at the perimeter. "Talking is hard work and they might be hungry." The alien guards looked at each other in confusion. No one had ever brought food to their commanding officers during a military negotiation. But after the reports they had heard about this particular human, child, they decided to allow her approach. Emma walked into the command tent with the confidence that only children possess. She set her basket on the table between the two alien leaders and began unpacking sandwiches, fruit, and a thermos of soup. "Hello," she said politely to both commanders. "I'm Emma. I thought you might be hungry since you've been talking for a long time." Commander Vexstock and Chieftain Kalra stared at the small human in amazement. This was the child their soldiers had described, the one whose kindness had changed the course of their thoughts about war and peace. "You are not afraid of us," Vexstock observed. "Should I be?" Emma asked, tilting her head. "You're trying to stop fighting, right? That makes you good people in my book." Kalra's skin shifted to delighted gold. "Your soldiers spoke truly about her," she said to Vexstock. "She possesses remarkable wisdom for one so young. Would you like to join us for lunch?" Emma asked both leaders. "I made extra because Mama always says that sharing food helps people become friends." The two commanders looked at each other, then back at the child who was offering them a meal.